Hey everybody, I am so excited to invite you all for another OnCanada Project politician vibe check where we suss out the character of the people who are running to represent the public. They're being paid to have the back of everybody, and often it feels like they don't really give a shit about most of us. So it's really important to us that we find candidates that seem to get it, that we can trust, can handle whatever the next crisis is, even if it's not on their platform. COVID wasn't on anyone's platform, but there are politicians around the world that handled it in a way that is impressive, and then there are politicians who shot the bed. So we are excited to have Chloe Brown come be a part of an IG live with us for a vibe check. Hi! I get so excited about people showing up on lives. It's not a cute look, but I can't help it. It's so nice to virtually connect like this. Thanks for finding time to do a live.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. We're on the top of our team's list for a really long time. Yeah, I guess maybe we can start with, for folks who don't know too much about you, do you want to introduce yourself and why you want to be mayor of the city?
Okay. So my name is Chloe Brown. I'm 32. I live in Toronto at the intersection of Bloor and Keele. And I'm running for mayor because as a 32-year-old person, I'm trying to make plans for my life in the city. And more I'm finding it inaccessible, not just from a housing level, but for basic benefit programs, like social services. And I find it to be particularly hard for working class people to get ahead. So as a policy analyst, I review reports, data, a whole bunch of information that is generated by the public for government. And even though we are going to the consultations, we're answering the surveys, the programs and the services are not reflecting working class needs. And this is where running for office is more than just about Chloe becoming the mayor. It's about changing the eligibility criteria for programs and services so that it's in line with the reality of working class people. Right now, a lot of our programs and services, they serve the privileged few. And we're seeing how that plays out in terms of access to housing, access to healthcare, access to public transit and the roads. So it's really important to me to give us a voice at the decision-making table, because we have to move on beyond consultations and create workshops. We need people working to become leaders in their communities by delivering these little projects and creating businesses, and also just developing land, because there's this big opportunity in the city of Toronto to really look at how vacant lands could work for the public, but it's really important that I create space. So that's really at the heart of why I'm doing this, because it's more than being a politician, it's about being a better community member, family member, and having the resources to actually implement the goals we have for our lives.
You are one of, if not the only candidate that's running again. I'm not sure if I haven't been paying, there's 100 of you running.
Yeah.
And there's a small group of people that I have been paying attention to. You were one of them. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because I found it really weirdly inspiring that you ran, and because I feel like it is so much to put yourself out there and do that for anybody, particularly racialized women, particularly Black women. And I think it really made me feel like you were so aligned with the values in order to run twice like this, and to really care about the issues. Because I don't know if anyone else would just put themselves out there for the chaos that is this experience, I imagine. If you wanted to maybe speak to that a little bit.
So my degree is in public administration and governance. And for me to be able to be well-versed as I am, it's because I work on the front line of programs and services. I worked at George Brown College. I worked for the Duke Heights business improvement area, and right now I work at Toronto Metropolitan University. And every day I meet people that want to pursue employment through businesses or just getting a job, and it's so difficult. If you don't have the right connections, if you didn't take this internship, that co-op, you get locked out of a lot of opportunities, and it really impacts the quality of public services, because then you only get a privileged group entering public services. There's a lot of executives, nonprofit executives, and management consultants that award projects and jobs to their kids and their friends. And that locks a lot of us out of the opportunity to improve public service. And that's why I feel it's so important to just put myself out there and move from beyond the veil. Because as a policy analyst, I report to government, and government then reports to you. So it's like I'm two veils behind like democracy, if I have to be honest. And I really wanted people to realize, like, I'm fighting for you behind the scenes, and I can't keep doing it behind the scenes, because if your elected officials are not transparent with the information I'm giving them, and they don't hold themselves accountable to the recommendations that I've created from the reports and surveys that you've been informing, then it doesn't matter how good of a person I am or how good my ideas are. I need the community to push their elected officials, their union leaders. I need them to push all people that are involved in leadership of their lives to fight for them. Because honestly, like, I'm burnt out as a public servant. I see so many good people get chewed up by the system of benefits, services, education, employment, because they're not well versed in the language of government. And it's really unfortunate, because when you underfund the public service, you underfund advocates. So it becomes harder to reach me. It becomes more difficult to understand the language that I use, because there's barriers intentionally designed to keep us apart. And that's why it's really important to me to just run and build a civic education platform, because if anything happens to me, I don't want this work to end. And it's important that a lot more people see themselves replacing me, as opposed to me being the answer to their solutions. Because there's you, there's me, there's 40,000 civil servants just at the city level. And then if you count on top of that, like the nonprofit workers, the activists, the advocates, there's a whole society of us trying to save each other. And that's more important than politics. It's more important than being liberal or right wing or socialist. All of us as working class people share the common story of trying to rise above the circumstances that we were dealt. And that's how society has always moved forward. It's us coming from that place of absence to gift something that is yet to be created for ourselves. It's for our kids, our niece and nephew. It's for our grandparents and our seniors. So that's really, I know it's a long answer, but it's like I'm running to make a better democracy. So if anything happens to me, you guys carry on without me and make sure that you're taken care of.
I really love that. I think you've illustrated such a, I'm also 32. So I really feel like I feel lost in the city. Like I feel like I am running at all cylinders to make ends meet and to live with purpose. And I feel like there's so much shit that is thrown on younger generations. And then also, like, I know also there's like older generations that are also really neglected as well. But from a younger generation point of view, like, it doesn't feel like the city was built for me. And then when I walk by like a Starbucks, which I used to work at as a barista in a Starbucks, I'm like, man, do these people even live in the city? Like, how do you afford to live here if you can't, like, and like, it doesn't feel right. It feels like the end time sometimes when I'm walking through. And, you know, transportation is getting scarier and scarier to be on. It's like, I feel like I can't be on public transit if I've been drinking, because I'm like less quick on my feet, you know. And like community safety, I feel like it's at the top of so many people's minds, particularly women and gender minorities. Like from your point of view and from your strategy, what do we do about that sort of community safety? Yeah, like kind of lens or like a solution, I guess, for community safety. And then as well as like housing.
Okay, so when it comes to community safety, one of the things I want to do is invest in harm reduction. And this is where a lot of the conversation has been dominated with the presence of needles and pipes and all that stuff, but rarely are we talking about the fact that a lot of us are trying to escape our reality. And we're doing that through substance abuse, we're doing that through obsession with social media. There's a variety of ways that we're all engaging in a form of harm reduction, but it's not the right form. Mm-hmm. And this is why it's important for harm reduction to come from a public health and community delivery system. Because the truth is, after the pandemic, a lot of us haven't talked about the amount of grief that we're going through. And sometimes, like for me personally, it's the loss of my stepfather. It's something I don't really like to talk about because I really thought the grief would have been the end of me. I had this huge hole in my life and I couldn't outwork it. I couldn't outsmart it. I couldn't do anything that was within my power to get rid of this grief. And for those reasons, I was pursuing different forms of harm. And that was social isolation. It was going to the bar and trying to drink my troubles away. And we need to have a city that is better than that. We need to have a city that actually it gives you time to mourn with your family. Because I didn't get that when I was running. To be honest, my father died and 2 weeks later we had to bury him. And because of the way COVID was running, it had to be quick. And it was something that it sticks with me to this day because I really still don't feel like I had a good goodbye to my stepfather. So for me, I dived into this community and it really motivated me to run because my stepfather gave me a sense of community. And the only way I see myself paying back that commitment and that investment is by being a better community member because my stepfather chose to love me. How much more should I choose to love other people who are not my family, but make it their business that Chloe Brown is okay? Mm-hmm. And that's really the form of harm reduction that I would love to invest in, where it's not just the safe consumption sites, but it's the aftercare. It's making sure that the social workers, the healthcare workers are housed and they're living affordably so that they can do the work that they're trained and talented to do. It's really hard to provide care. And this is why harm reduction needs to be invested in, because harm reduction is art therapy. Harm reduction is gathering spaces in the park. It's sharing a meal. One thing that really moved me is that during Iftar, which is a Muslim celebration, people come together to share a meal, to break their fast. And that is such a great act of not only community building, but discipline, because you're denying yourself a meal and then you come together with all the same people that share that faith. And this is where harm reduction is really investing in growing people's faith in each other, because the truth is conflict is inevitable, but suffering is not. We have created a society that's all about reducing suffering through community. And that's where harm reduction needs to be invested in libraries. So having after hours for Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, making sure that adults can access that space so that they're with peers also going through the sobriety struggle. It means having a nightlife economy that actually works with its bartenders, its security guards, to make sure that people are not using the nightlife as a form of numbing. Because a lot of people go into our nighttime economy to drink, to abuse others and abuse themselves, and they return every weekend because that's their form of therapy. So making sure that therapy is not just talking to a clinician, but it's an active everyday engagement, because the only way to reduce harm is to reduce trauma. And there's a lot of trauma in this city, and our generation is really the first generation to have the language of mental wellness, the relationship of trauma, poverty, and we are unfortunately, it's our responsibility to push for wellness and harm reduction for all generations, not just like our age, but a lot of us don't realize like our parents are hiding trauma under self-medicating, under working, under a variety of activities to numb their trauma. And that's their harm reduction, and it's killing them. And that's why it's really important to me to not only think about safety from a lens of law enforcement, but community development. Because the way that I grew up, I was put out of harm's way because so many community members made it their business for me never to like abuse substance. They made it their business that I was in sports, I was at the library, I was always engaged. And this is why community programming is so important, because I was looking at our young people, especially the under 25, where do they go for mentorship? Where do they go for empathetic support? There's nowhere. Like, they can't go to the mall without security kicking them out. The libraries close early. The community centers are far and few. And our college and university spaces are not open to them until they become 18 years old. So we really need to invest in community assets as a form of harm reduction if we want safety. And this is where like I try to separate the TTC issue away from law enforcement, because yeah, the truth is, it's like we have people that are disabled that are homeless. Unless we build them housing, they will remain homeless. We kick them out of the shelter hotels without a plan. We kick them out of the parks without a plan. You keep evicting sick people, what do you think is going to happen? And that's why it's really important to me also that public safety is about building housing rapidly. We have 3D printing, modular construction, prefabricated housing. We can build housing in 9 months, micro homes. We can use shipping containers. There's so many opportunities to just get people off the street and into something permanent, because that's really what prolongs trauma, not having stability in your life or a sense of security. And who else suffers from that but people that are deeply traumatized? And most of the people that have substance abuse, it's statistically because they've been involved in some form of severe trauma. So it's like, let's give them a place to dissect their issues and a community where they can do it in private, because we can create closed courtyards that give people the security and dignity to solve their problems at their own pace. But if they're on the street, they become easy victims for traffickers, for people that want to sell them like non-medical drugs for their medical problems. So it's really about us taking a community approach to helping our loved ones, our neighbors, because people, and it really frustrates me, but the homeless is not a separate population. There are people with disabilities. There are people that have substance use disorders, and they're family members. There are friends. There are people we know, and they're deserving of dignity, equality, and freedom, because that's the baseline of any democracy. So yeah, I have a multi-step plan for it, but it's like using our community assets to house the most vulnerable and get them the help that they need, because we don't hesitate to build hospitals. Imagine if apartments actually had home care and community care clinics at the bottom. People could receive treatment without being evicted or losing their home. It's really a matter of us advocating for security for all of us, not just those who can afford it. Yeah, that was a long one.
No, I mean, goodness. I feel like you're speaking to the issues in a way that a lot of young people are feeling, and I'm sure there are older generations that resonate here as well. But the reason I'm focusing in on the young people perspective is because as a younger person, I feel like I'm constantly hearing politicians talk around what needs to be addressed with Band-Aid solutions often, or with like I'm not saying that these aren't wicked and complex issues. They are. Yeah. But at the center of it is like a need for dignity and human rights. And I think you articulate that in a way that's like of course we're going to do this. Whereas I think a lot of times it's made to sound like a lot of the stuff that you're describing is occurring in places around the world, you know, building into these systems. It's not like we've been inventing it for the first time. But I think because it's been so long, if ever, that we've seen that kind of community cohesion, support, it takes a village energy in Toronto, that it feels like, oh, that's never going to work, or that's never, but it's like, it could, it's just, you need the leadership that's going to back that, and that's going to prioritize that without like selling out to developers or whatever.
Yeah.
White men
And well,
do.
and this is the thing, it's like we talk about affordable housing a lot, but what we really want is nonprofit real estate development.
Mm-hmm.
We want to own just like everyone else. And I say this often, but the only difference between a condo and an apartment is that the bank owns the mortgage. Meanwhile, we are paying tax dollars for public lands that are being given away to for-profit developers. What we need is politicians to say, like, this has to be mixed market housing. There must be community space in it. And it's really a matter of them, as our elected officials, demanding it in our name. And that's really what pushes me to continue fighting for us, because you're absolutely right. The things that I'm describing are policy. These are things that are written and then adopted.
Mm-hmm.
You can always go back and change them, but it's a matter of your elected official actively working for you. And that's one of their biggest problems. It's like once they win the popularity contest, they don't realize that democratic governance means everybody's rights need to be accounted for. Even the people that you don't like, or the ones that like troll you online, it doesn't matter. Like, my job is to serve everyone. And that's why I often talk about being politically homeless, because when it comes to progress, I've met so many people who would be categorized as the right based on their religion and their fundamentalist approach to things, but they're the first ones to help me. And that's really speaks volumes about the multidimensionality of who we are. Because as a kid in Toronto, I grew up with Muslim, I grew up with Sikh, I grew up with Sunni, I grew up with people that are Orthodox, and they're all from different parts of the world. The thing that brings us together is that we have that working class solidarity, where it's like my grandparents came here earning $2 an hour. And that's such a common story for so many of us from racialized communities, Eastern European communities, where it's like we weren't wanted, or we had to flee for our lives, and we chose to come here and give it our all. And that's really the story that I'm trying to elevate here, where it's just like, you came here with nothing. Your family came here with nothing. You deserve everything. Like, how could you not believe you don't deserve, when it's your blood, sweat, and tears that's built up all these corporations, these monopolies, that's built up this city where it's the most diverse place in the world, and despite all the violence that we're hearing about as Torontonians, remains one of the safest places to be. And that's really what I'm trying to remind people, like, have the audacity to demand more for yourself, because look how much time you've put into this city. I've been working since the age of 15. I'm 32 now. I've been working for 17 years, and it's like, of course I'm gonna feel a certain way that my money is not being spent for me. I've been working ever since the 10th grade. I've put $1 million into the system. You know what I mean? And this is where it's like, I have the audacity of Doug Ford to say, like, well, if I want something, I'm gonna get it. Because my parents worked for it. I worked for it. My grandmothers worked for it. All of us are working. You know who hasn't been working? The children of politicians. They've been living off of, and that's the thing, like, Doug Ford's been living off of your tax dollars because his father worked for Mike Harris. John Tory's father, like, great-grandfather, is like the owner of Sun Life Financial. His father is the owner of corporate law firm Tory's LLP. And this type of privilege has been paid for through us. Us working, taking overtime, sacrificing time with our families. We deserve to be paid back for it. And I don't think I'm asking for much when, like, you know, politicians are arguing about minimum wage. They're arguing about privatizing things that I paid for. If I'm asking for basic access they should be jumping over hoops to deliver it because they chose this job. They chose the public sector. They could have done anything. They could have ruined their parents' business, but you decided to ruin my business. The business of my parents, my grandparents, that's paid for through pensions, union dues, taxes, HST, GST. We have to demand for more, because when they see voters turn out, they take that as a sign that we are fine with the way things are. And that's really what I'm trying to challenge people. Like, you have to vote. Too many people have died and fought for you to have the luxury to go out one day out of every 4 years and cast the ballot. And if you don't take that seriously, then they start to privatize the public services that you paid for. They start to sell off public land that is held in your name to pay off their donors. And this is where we have to really start seeing that we own everything and we need the title signed off to us. And this is where I promote community land trust, because in Parkdale, the Parkdale community got together and they pressured Gord Perks to give them 85 units of Toronto community housing. That is land that we pay for. That's land that they are technically entitled to, but never had the legal title of. And this is where it's like, yeah, policy can reclaim the public realm, but it's up to us to demand the public realm is restored to us. And I can't do that by myself. I need every one of you to demand that, because who is Doug Ford? He's one man. Who are his MPPs? It's just 100 people to 6 million. We have to start leaning into our numbers, because if we don't get out and vote, like, they don't even win by a majority. They still win by minority. They still have to serve us. So yeah, there's a lot of feelings that I have in terms of like the things that we need to do to become better, but it's easy for me to believe it because I see it happen. I see it happen every day in these little isolated pockets. And I just want to bring all of it together, because it's like, I can only imagine what all of you would be capable of if I introduced you to each other, if I gave you the resources to explore those ideas that you had in your head. Like, imagine what you could do. And the only way to make it happen is, unfortunately, for me to become the mayor and to break down the mayor's office so that it once again serves people, because the mayor's office hasn't done that in 10 years. It's been an extra apartment for investors and corporations. And that's why our city doesn't feel like it serves residents. It feels like it serves a business class that only stops in for half a year. And that's really what I want to change, because I live here all year round and so do you. So go ahead.
My goodness. I just wanted to just as a personal thing say that, like, to have the audacity to be like, this is ours, and like that feeling. It's funny because I say that to my parents all the time when they're like, why are you an entrepreneur? Like, why didn't you do what we told you to do and like get it, you know? And I was like, first of all, I didn't mean to do this. But second of all, you came here and you fought to survive, and I want to thrive. And the only system that allows me to thrive is a system that I like, or a space that I carve out and build for myself and for people like me. And I think and I say, like, I like might be ancestrally from one land, but being born here has given me this feeling of audacity and like, I deserve this. And that can't just serve me, it also has to serve the people as well. So I'm so deeply moved to hear literally anyone running for office, but particularly someone like you that's saying this stuff. It just makes me feel like I'm not saying nonsense, as my parents say that I am, but they're doing their best. They're doing their best, but
no, and that's really what I want to challenge. It's just, you didn't survive this long to be denied your basic human rights. And there's so many people that I think of when I think of the disadvantage, and it's like, there are a lot of kids that are born into households where their parents don't care about them. There are young men and women that have gone off to war and come back as veterans and they're not supported. There's so many people that need to be represented, and it's really important to me that their voices are heard, because they deserve to be heard. despite the circumstances that you're born into, you're so much more than that, and you'll never realize it unless you're exposed to opportunity. And that's really what this has become for me. Like, I need to expose more working class people to the same opportunities that I got exposed to, because how else will you believe that you're worthy of leading your city? You're worthy of receiving a full civic education. And that's really what's slowing down our democracy. A lot of us know politics from social media, but a lot of us are lacking a civic education. And that's really hard for me to digest, because it's like, yeah, I went to school and I have an education, but then you start to realize, like, it doesn't matter if you got an education. There's a lot of people who are marginalized by education. If you're a person with disabilities, if you're a senior that grew up with the education system constantly punishing you, if you're a newcomer and your English isn't like ours, there's so many barriers, and a lot of them are put up because people of privilege are terrified of how much better you could do their job. And that has to stop. Like, our society doesn't progress based on fear. It progresses when adults plant trees that they will never sit under or enjoy the shade of. And to me, that's become such a huge mantra for me, because that's exactly who my stepfather was. He planted a tree that I could sit under, and it was just being supported, having a parent that was home in the afternoon, because my father was a skilled tradesman. So he's first one in, first one out, first one in. And as I talk to so many different like occupations, construction workers are suffering. There's an opioid crisis at the work site, and no one's talking about it, but people are demanding housing. They're demanding faster builds. They want the roads done. And it's like, if we can't support the workers who deliver the services, we can't have high expectations. And that's really frustrating, because I see the potential of Toronto being held back by elected officials who are too far removed from working class realities to understand that you could help bring more construction workers into better jobs by providing atypical childcare. You could give them better equipment by working with like tool and die makers, artists, designers, because not all clothing and tools work with every type of worker. There's this really big opportunity to start customizing programs, services, products, so that they actually meet the needs of people. But if you don't have the courage to ask people what they need and then to deliver upon it, you get stuck here where it's like you have these circular conversations about diversity, equity, inclusion, but never reach the goal.
No.
Yeah, and that's really what I'm trying to challenge here. Like, I'm done with hearing the theory of how things work. I want to make people show me how things work, because that's the only way I've ever learned something. Giving people a chance to prove to me that I'm ignorant and that there's more to me than the limitations I put on myself. And that's really what I drive with this campaign. It's just like, I want you to learn so that you become better than me, so that you don't have to live Chloe Brown's life despite how great it is. But if you choose not to, like, you don't have to. And this is why it's so important that this is more than popularity. I want you to learn. I want you to question authority. I want you to crave more from your political discourse. And the only way to do that is by having a little courage to get a little bit of criticism every now and then. And that's why I try not to see myself as brave or what I'm doing as remarkable, because I used to be a novice. I used to be ignorant about capitalism and socialism. Like, I was 22 when I got involved in politics because my friend dared me to go to Occupy Toronto. And then he dared me to sleep inside of a tent and tell him that things were fine with my city. And I did it. And it took one night of me sleeping outside in St. James Park to realize like how deeply the issue of poverty was in our city and how morally repugnant it is. Because I've grown up seeing men on the street since I was 20 and they're still there. That's unacceptable. I should never accept that as being okay in a country with so much land and money. And that's really why I'm involved in politics, because the truth is, I would rather be materially poor than spiritually
Uh,
bankrupt.
just like how many politicians have ever, like, who has ever said that in the history of Canadian politics? That's
I appreciate it.
I also will say that like the unhoused community, that the statistics are like damning, and it like I don't know how we call ourselves a G7 country if we're unable to take care of our most vulnerable populations. Like life expectancy is half the like average person's life. Like that's in a G7 nation, like an entire community. That's barbaric. It's savage, really. And they, if we need leader to push back against that and model for other cities what can be done by showing it, like walking that here. Man, I just, I'm actually heading out to vote right after this, and it has just given me so much to dream for, like feel hope around.
And that's what I'm trying to do, because Japan didn't get the way that it did overnight. Rome wasn't built in a day, but they last because they've always put their people first. And that's really something I'm trying to make people realize. Like, you don't have to go full communist, full socialist, full capitalist to provide for your people. You need to bring together the mixture of ideas and bake a cake of imagination. I don't know how else to put it, but so many people forget that societies really are about people coming together and trying to decide for each other, like, how do we live ethically? How do we live kinder lives, healthier lives? And a lot of this just starts as ideas. What makes them into the world you know is your persistence and your consistency with seeing these ideas through. Because, yeah, truth is, like, business is full of a bunch of ideas. The ones that we adopt into our lives are the ones that are persistent. And I say this thinking about Uber. I remember when Uber was just this really strange hitchhiking app where, like, oh, you expect me to get into a stranger's car? Now, Uber does ride shares, it does car rentals, it does delivery. It's doing so much because it's listening to your data. And all it does is give you a rating system. How much better could TTC be if it allowed you to rate your ride from your destination to your end destination? And they allowed you to say what was going on, like, oh, the ride on the subway was terrible, but the bus was fine. If we were actually demanding that our public services were competitive against private sector goods, how much more would our public service do for us? Right now, yeah, like right now, all it does is subsidize a bunch of rich kids who don't want to work, who like don't want to work, or they are rejected from working in their family's business. And this is where I would really challenge a lot of us to look at some of the backgrounds of our politicians. A lot of them have just been passed down roles of power. They've never worked in the private sector. They've never worked outside their parents' business. How could we ever expect them to understand the hardships when they've always been sheltered from them? And that's really, yeah, like that's really at the heart of what I'm trying to get us to speak more about, because all of us know it's happening, but if we don't speak up about it, our issues die in silence. And the people that are oppressing you assume that you like it because you didn't say anything about it. So speak up. Speak up and be heard.
The thing about it is that you didn't say it in the way that they told you to say the thing about it. People are saying things, but they don't count the frustration. They don't count the tweets. They don't count the, like, all of that. They just go, if you didn't go to the polls, that must mean you're fine, which is a ridiculous way of judging whether or not people are fine. Like, they're not fine. And I think also, like, what I think of where we could go as a city, and like how, generally speaking, Toronto, because of how diverse it is, has the potential to be this like shift in the system and to be like a comprehensive solution, right? Like, it's not like my live in Markham. Like, I don't know how to fix Markham in the York region area. Like, but it feels possible here and it feels necessary here, but it will require us to go to the polls. And I think there's a lot of apathy because we're exhausted and because we haven't seen leaders return on investment, but that maybe we've just been voting for the wrong people.
Yeah.
Or seeing the wrong candidates out there, you know?
Well, this is where a lot of us have grown up with the idea that the most successful person is the CEO. And our ideas of success have always been driven by capital. Like, how much do you got? How much material wealth do you have? Meanwhile, there are people living successful lives because they got out of their circumstance. For me, I feel like I'm successful because I have my own place. In 2020, I was living in a rooming house with 7 other people. Like, that was my reality. And I'm still as intelligent as I was back then. It's just the circumstances were stuck. And this is where I try to be as vulnerable and open with people as possible, because it's hard. I'll be fully transparent. Like, I was lucky to get my apartment because there was a pandemic. It wasn't the government that subsidized my apartment. It's like people were literally forced to leave because the world was shut down. And those conditions shouldn't be needed to create affordability. And that's why it's just like so important to me to get more people thinking, you're a leader. You don't need to put on a suit. You don't need to go to the Ted Rogers School of Business. Like, no disrespect to them. Shout out to Schulich. Shout out to Ted Rogers. We love a good business crew, but they're not the only leaders. Social workers, nurses, ECE workers, construction workers. I don't care if you pick up garbage. Do you care about people? Are you willing to follow through with the ideas that you have in your head? Because if so, like, you're a leader and you deserve to have this platform. And I want more people to realize, like, you've been bamboozled by con men who look good. That's like that is how they con you. They look good and they distract you while they're robbing your piggy bank. And the more of us that accept that, like, yeah, there's non-traditional leaders, you don't have to look a certain way, the harder it will be for them to scam us. And that's really, like, this is a trust exercise because we've been conditioned to believe, like, oh, you're successful if you own a business, but you're successful if you made it out of your neighborhood and that was your goal. You're successful if you have the pet of your dreams. You're successful if you're working in the job that you dreamt of. You now need to help other people by leading and showing them that there's an alternative way, because unless we break that mindset, we will always vote for the same type of person. And that's really, it's a larger cultural shift, because in my personal opinion, we're at the end of the capitalist project. We're at the end of the age of consumption. And now it's about producing. What can you produce with what's left? Because I try not to, like, scare people, but it's like we're at the tail end of an era. And there's a lot of grieving going to happen, because capitalism is not just an economic system. It is how we've been socialized with individualism, chasing material wealth. The reason why we have no community is it's by design. Capitalism is not about community. It's about how much can you consume and accumulate. So when I talk about cultural change, it's really like, I need all of us to realize that we need to move into a post-capitalist era. I don't know what it's called, like what the name of it will be called. I don't know if it's democratic socialism. You know, like, it's still very new to me, but I'm here to help you through it. And that's what's really important. Like, I don't think people realize, but it's like, I don't want to be a politician forever. That's how tyranny begins. You know, like, you give one person power forever and ever and nothing changes. So it's like, in these 3 years, what I want to help you do is create community-centered democracy, because that's the only way out of this. If we as community members start to participate in the budget, in cooperative planning and creating cooperative businesses as opposed to competitive business, we will survive. And I want to create a public service that incentivizes it, because one region I really admire is the Mondragon region in Basque Spain. It's a federation of 700 worker co-ops, and they support each other. They create $7 billion in wealth for that region, and it's because they're working cooperatively instead of competitively. We live in a very small pond in terms of Canada, where there's a limit on the amount of grant funding that's available, the amount of non-repayable loans. So it's like, how can we form our own supply chains where it's like, okay, if I work here and I have access of this material, could I give it to you instead of throwing it out? Like, there's so much opportunity for collaborative consumption, collaborative production, and that could reduce the excess waste. And that's why it's just, I always say it, but it's like, it's about restoring democracy for the working class, because we have been living with raw capitalism, subsidizing socialism for the rich. We just need democracy. And that's really at the heart of our society. It's just, the reason why we're all working together is because none of us believe in monarchies, coronations. We believe in the equality of all men under the law, and we have to get back to that. Everything else is just noise.
I mean, like, I don't believe in monarchy, but it does feel that some of these political dynasties are a little bit like, and also just like who is being, or like, if it's only the wealthy and the elite class ruling, then it's not monarchy, but it's giving monarchy, kind of, you know?
Yeah, aristocracy.
Yeah, we need an alternative. We are the majority. Working middle class people are the majority, and we have to stop making it easier for that small group of people to have that control over.
It's hard to confront your bully.
Oh my gosh, isn't that true? Yes.
Yeah. And that's really what I've noticed from doing the door-to-door activation. It's just, if you're constantly bullied by a narcissistic state, it's hard to think. You're getting love bombed, gaslit, but on a systemic level. It's not just like your bad ex. It's like an army of bad exes just out to convince you that your life isn't real, your problems aren't real, and you should just be satisfied with what you have. And like, to be honest, this is the first time that we have that type of language. Like, we have a narcissistic government. So it's just, I'm empathetic to all of us, because it's like, yeah, you don't know you're being abused until someone from the outside is like, hey, this is wrong. You shouldn't be treated this way. And a lot of us are starting to learn that about our government, where it's like, we thought the government supported us. We thought the government was there for us. And COVID made us feel like that, where we were getting CRB payments. We were actually talking about remote work. We were actually being a part of the conversation. And now that rug's been pulled out of us, it's just like, yeah, I imagine people's systems are shocked. Like, their brains have yet to like really process, like, the government can actually save us and it's choosing not to.
That was a big like clusterfuck for me, to be like, oh, you can move fast. You can go at a quick speed when there's an issue that, like, I was like, whoa, like, so quickly, all of a sudden we were doing doctor appointments on the phone. We were doing like all these, like, adapting to all of the, you know, and it was incredible, because it felt like for a brief second we were all on the same team, and our leaders, especially at the beginning, it felt like our leaders had our back, and I was like, wow, this feels good. I'm terrified. I'm so scared about what's happening around me, but I don't feel alone. Yeah. And I feel like my leaders that we vote for and pay for through our taxes are advocating for me, not against me, and pretending that they're doing it for me.
Yeah.
And then we went back to this. So we need an alternative way forward. I agree. I think that capitalism is I think it's going to die, but it's going to go down fighting. And we need people willing to say that whatever that other thing is, that isn't capitalism, that they're like, yeah, I'm ready to try something new, because we're doing the same thing over and over again and expecting that one day the system is going to work. But like spoiler, capitalism is not designed for anyone other than the elite, and
Yeah.
none of us are the elite. Like, unless
And
you're like
that's,
Succession Roman Roy level, like you're not, this is not your for you.
and honestly, like it's always shocking to me that people other each other so quickly. And it's happened primarily through politicians saying, oh, we're going to help the middle class. The middle class is the working class. I don't know why they would bother to divide them any further. It's just like, do you have to work for a living? Yes.
Yes.
Do your parents have an inheritance for you? No. Then you're one of me. You're a pavo.
Yes.
So it becomes one of those really, it's all really about education, where it's just like people don't even know what affordability means to them. You know, like if I'm making $150,000 as an individual with no children, do I need affordable housing? No. If I'm making 150 with a disabled child and I have no support, yes, I need affordable housing. And this is where it becomes very important for us to talk to each other regularly. Even if it's coming together like every Sunday to just have like a political throwdown, do it, because you never know who's suffering in silence and how you could leverage each other's power for change. And that's one thing about this campaign, where it's like, this time around, I let a bunch of people just help me because they believe in Chloe. It was very hard to do this because it's like, okay, so I have to let a bunch of strangers into my heart and my house. Ugh, but we all believe in the same thing. And that's really where I want people to realize, like, if you want change, gather regularly, talk about your problems, hash it out. You do it with your family. Your family has some of the hottest takes you'll ever hear, but you somehow manage to love them and show up for them. Extend that courtesy to your neighbor, because as we get older, like, the meaning of family changes. And you deserve to have a sense of belonging and community no matter what happens to your life. The only way you get to that is by being honest, being authentic, telling people what's really going on. And that's what I owe to this campaign. I'm not doing anything remarkable. I'm speaking my truth, and you're hearing it and you're seeing yourself in me. And that's why I've been successful. I'm just reflecting what is real to me and letting other people see it, because that's the truth that we all share. Like, we're all suffering. It doesn't matter if you're making like 60,000 working government, which I do, and I'm still like worried about whether or not I can make my rent. I worked through the majority of this campaign because it's like the rent still has to be paid whether or not I win this race. And I want people to realize, like, yes, running in an election is hard, but it's not impossible. Everything seems impossible until it's done. And that's really where we as the working class need to acknowledge, like, yes, I'm tired, but that doesn't mean like I'm unstoppable. And if we're willing to take off that vacation day to see Beyonce in concert, imagine what would happen if you take a vacation day with 20 of your friends to confront your government. Things can happen. It's really just a matter of us believing in each other to make it happen. Because, like, as I said, there's one MP for the entire neighborhood. You think you're not going to listen to me and go home and just like hang out with your family peacefully while I'm suffering? No. Lace up your shoes and get out here. And that's what we really need to say to all these politicians. You chose this job, so lace up your shoes and get out here, because there's problems. And if you don't want to solve the problems, quit.
Get off the
No one's no one's holding them hostage.
No.
And that's where, like, I try to like manage my expectations, because I don't want you bullying them, but please do encourage them to quit if their job is too hard.
We've been saying that in our content recently. We've been saying, like, when what we're writing, we've been like, if you don't want to represent the public, that's fine. Get off the seat then. Don't say you're going to put the public's best interest at the top of mind, and then like sell out to developers and have backroom deals and sell like Ontario Place to like the highest bidder for 95 years. Like, we need politicians who are going to do that, or go work in the private sector. The private sector, for all its faults, is honest. Their priority is their shareholders and profits. Politicians are supposed to put us as their priority, and that is not happening.
Yeah. And that's really, honestly, that is the biggest issue around this election. It's not just housing, public transit, it's the fact that politicians are openly and consistently disrespecting their voters. How could the quality of TTC go down, but you're increasing the CEO's compensation? You wouldn't do that if you were taking the TTC with us.
No.
You wouldn't be building luxury condos if you were living in apartments like we do. And this is why I'm constantly on their asses about being working class representatives, because it's, even Olivia Chow has been in government so long that she's a millionaire.
Yeah.
Josh Matlow's been in politics since 2010. He collects $100,000 and more a year.
What?
Yeah.
There's a lot of money.
People don't realize, like, your city councilor is bringing in $115,000 a year. The mayor who's bringing in $200,000 a year and still working at Rogers as a board of director, taking in $100,000. They're not poor. They're nothing like us after a certain amount of time, because they're, by the end of their reign in that 4 years, they've taken home $400,000 of your tax dollars. There's no job description for politicians. There's no open metric system for you to follow their promises and see if they've actually fulfilled them. And this is why they're playing in our faces, disrespecting us, selling our land, because what are you going to do about it? They're really, this is what this election is really about. What are you as the working class going to do to the political class? Are you going to hold them accountable? Are you going to boycott them? Have a general strike? You haven't. So why would they take us seriously? And I say this because I used to be one of those NDP cheerleaders that used to take my sign, rally around Queen's Park, shout rah, rah solidarity. That's not working. We're working against a premier that doesn't respect democracy. You think he's going to play by our rules? We have to get smarter. We have to get more ambitious with the goals that we have, because it's very clear to me that you can't beg for your freedom from your oppressor. Outsmart him, outmaneuver him. And that's where, like, even further, when I think about addiction in our city, we had a mayor that was openly using substance in the highest office at City Hall. Rob Ford was a functional addict. We have never spoken about harm reduction, treatment, rehabilitation as a city, or put parameters in place from ever making this happen again. And as we're looking at this election, the candidate Gong, who's a convicted fraudster, is making a joke of our political system by taking the wealth that he stole from New Zealand and running a mayoral campaign. People wonder why our city feels like a den for thieves. Our whole real estate industry is propped up by money laundering. No one's doing anything about it. Police are being put into the subway. Meanwhile, fraud is propping up the entire organized crime syndicates of our city, and they're laundering their money through our real estate industry, which should be providing us housing. Our city is so deeply unserious when it comes to working class people. And it's something that disturbs me, because it's like, so you're okay with me being robbed. You're okay with us being put in harm's way because you're protected. And we have to say enough, because no matter how many thoughts and prayers politicians and nonprofit leaders send, we still have to take TTC. We still have to feel the violence. We still have to shop at the monopoly that is Loblaws. You know what I mean? And this is where, if politicians cared, every food bank would be an urban farm, a public grocery store. We would be using public land to grow food and bring down the cost of food. We'd be using public land to build apartments to bring down the cost of rent. We'd be taking the city-owned fiber optic cables that Bell, Rogers, and Telus is selling to us, and we'd maintain it ourselves for public broadband. We can have a whole bunch of publicly competitive goods and services if the government was focused on our needs as opposed to satisfying their corporate donors. So yeah, that's my little rant, but it's like, I want the community to own its things. I want it to own its responsibilities as much as it owns its rights, because you can't have rights if you don't take the responsibility to protect them. And that is freedom. Like, that gives you freedom. The freedom to choose whether or not you do something is based on your responsibility to take care of your rights. So that's where I'll close, because I could talk all day.
I thank you so much, Chloe, for coming here today. I went to your aunties and nieces event.
Yes.
I got introduced to Bold Lemonade, which, this is not an ad, but oh my God, changed my life in one way. But on the other side, I remember choosing to go because I saw that you had other candidates attending an event that you were organizing and putting, you know? And I'm like, that is community over competition. That is like doing the value over just talking about the values, or like pretend like, and that was really like fascinating to see someone being so different from what we've come to expect from political people. And I was like, wait, I forgot that there are people like that out there doing the thing. So I just wanted to say thank you for finding the time to do this live with us. I feel like I'm leaving like hopeful for what the city could be like, and I've been feeling a little pessimistic recently, so it does feel quite good to feel connected and to feel that in my feet as I go to the polls to vote. Today is, I think, the last day for advanced polls, but folks, you can vote on the 26th, make a plan, get out there, take your friends with you, get brunch after or something. I don't know, like make a whole thing out of it. It'll be fun, but please get out, vote, and vote for leaders that are speaking what you're feeling, as opposed, and like that you can trust, over ones that are just saying the right words, but not like you can feel that they have someone that comes in to clean their place once a week. Like, it's like a different vibe than folks that like get it.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. It's like, we forget that society has been pushed forward by small groups of laborers since the dawn of time. And we should be proud of that. You weren't born with a crown and a scepter in your hand, but look at you pushing society forward, you know? Yeah. So be proud of yourselves, like all of you. I want to remind working class people, like, you're worth it. You get up every day before the sun rises, in some cases, to catch a bus, to operate the machinery, to help someone in need. Like, you're so worth it. And you deserve someone who fights for you, because you're doing good work. And if my good work is to beat up on your government officials, like, let me do it, because as long as you get to do what your soul, your spirit, your ethos is designed to do, like, you'll always be on the right side of history. So, like, let me help you stay on that side.
Thank you so much, Chloe, for coming by. And for anyone still watching this, we will be reposting it by the end of this week, so folks can watch it, and it'll be on our YouTube by Monday.
All right, awesome.
Thanks, folks, and have a good evening.